My name is Zara Mitchell, and I am 32 years old. And last Tuesday, I signed a development contract for the town where my family laughed at me 8 years ago. I want to start there because that is where the story becomes what it is. But I need you to understand the 8 years between that Thanksgiving dinner and last Tuesday, because the contract only means what it means in the context of the 8 years. Without the 8 years, it is just a contract. With the 8 years, it is the specific and complete arrival of something that has been moving in one direction for a very long time. I was 24 years old at that Thanksgiving, 24 and working two jobs and saving with the focused, specific discipline of a woman who has a number in her head and a plan behind the number, and who has been executing the plan quietly for 3 years without telling anyone. Because telling people plans before they are far enough along to be undeniable is something I had learned not to do in a family that had an opinion about everything I attempted before I attempted it. I had not intended to announce it at dinner. I had been asked what I was doing with my life, the way I was always asked at family gatherings, in the specific, patient tone of people who have decided what they think and are performing open-mindedness. And for the first time in 24 years of being asked that question, I had told the truth. I said, I am starting a real estate development company. I said it clearly and without qualification because it was true, and I did not need to qualify true things. Before I tell you what my Uncle Raymond said, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you are when you listen to this. Now, let me tell you what happened at that table. The laugh started with Derek. My cousin Derek, who was 27 at the time and working a job he did not like, and who had the specific energy of a person who has not done anything with his own life and compensates for that by finding reasons why other people's plans are unrealistic. He made a sound. Technically, it was not a laugh. In practice, it was entirely a laugh. The specific sound of someone registering something as ridiculous before the sentence is even finished. Then, Raymond, my Uncle Raymond, who was 53 and had owned a hardware store in Millhaven for 20 years, and who had the particular confidence of a man who has been the most successful person in a small room for a long time and has mistaken that room for the world. He said, "Real estate development, baby girl, you can barely afford your apartment." He said it with the warm dismissiveness of someone who thinks he is being helpful. The worst kind of dismissal, the kind that comes in the voice of concern. My father said nothing. My father's silence was its own category, not agreement with Raymond exactly, not disagreement, the silence of a man who had decided this was not worth engaging with and whose silence communicated that decision more clearly than any words would have. My mother said, "Zara, maybe start with something smaller." She said it gently. She meant it kindly. It was still the wrong thing. I looked around that table. I looked at the people who had known me my entire life. My father, who had seen me work since I was 15. My mother, who knew I had been saving for 3 years. Derek, who had never finished the business course he enrolled in 2 years earlier. Raymond, who had never operated at a scale larger than the one his father had left him. I looked at all of them for a long moment. I did not say anything. I excused myself from the table. I said, "Thank you for dinner." I got my coat. I drove home. The drive was 45 minutes. I did not play music. I drove in the specific quiet of a person who is doing something with what just happened rather than simply feeling it. By the time I pulled into my parking space, I had decided two things. One, I was not going to discuss my business plans with my family again until the business was large enough that discussion was unnecessary. Two, I was going to go back to work. I went back to work. I want to be precise about what that means in the years immediately following Thanksgiving 2016, because going back to work is a phrase that sounds simple, and the reality of it was not simple. It was early mornings and late nights and weekends, and the specific grinding consistency of building something real when you have limited capital and no external validation, and a family whose opinion of the project is a laugh sound made by your cousin Derek. The first property I developed was a 4-unit residential building in a neighborhood 2 cities over from Millhaven. I had found it through 18 months of market research. I had financed it through a combination of my own savings and a small business loan from a lender who had the peculiar quality of someone who looks at numbers rather than assumptions, and the numbers I had presented were solid. The project took 14 months. It was not perfect. There were cost overruns in the third month that required me to renegotiate the contractor timeline and work 3 additional months at my second job simultaneously. There were permitting delays that pushed the completion date by 6 weeks. There were 2 weeks in month 9 where I was not entirely sure the numbers were going to work, and I sat with that uncertainty at my kitchen table every evening, and I did not call anyone about it, because calling people meant explaining things I was not ready to explain. The project completed. The building sold. The return was not dramatic. It was enough. Enough to prove the model to myself and to the lender, and to begin the second project with slightly more capital and slightly more confidence, and the specific momentum of a person who has done the thing once and understands now how to do it better. I did not call Millhaven after the first project closed. I did not text. I did not update anyone on the progress I was making, because I had said what I said at Thanksgiving, and the family had said what they said, and I had decided that the next communication of substance was going to be a communication they could not dismiss. The second project was larger, the third larger than the second. By Project 5, I had 6 employees. By Project 8, I had 17. By year 6, I had an office in the city and a track record that a regional business publication had described as one of the most consistent growth curves in emerging real estate development in the state. I had not sent the article home. I did not need to. I was working. The Millhaven contract arrived on my desk in September. Not as a surprise. I had been watching Millhaven for 2 years. It is a small town with specific characteristics that made it interesting from a development perspective. Undervalued commercial corridor, growing regional population pressure from 2 larger adjacent cities, aging infrastructure that was creating opportunity rather than liability for a developer who knew how to read the situation correctly. I had been building a case for Millhaven in my analysis files for 18 months before the specific opportunity materialized. The opportunity was a mixed-use development project, commercial ground floor, residential above. 3 buildings on adjacent lots in the center of the commercial corridor. The kind of project that changes the economic character of a small town when it is done well, and that requires a developer with both the capital and the track record to be taken seriously by the municipal planning board. I had the capital, I had the track record. I submitted the proposal in August. The planning board reviewed it for 3 weeks. They came back with questions I answered completely and specifically. They came back with conditions I negotiated professionally. The contract was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in my office. I read it one final time. I signed it. I put it in the file. I told my assistant to note the completion. I went back to my desk and I opened the next item on my agenda. I did not call Millhaven. I did not text my mother. I did not send my Uncle Raymond an article or my cousin Derek a message that said, "Remember Thanksgiving 2016." I did not do any of those things because they were not the point and had never been the point. The point was the work. The work was the point from the day I drove home from Thanksgiving dinner and sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The local Millhaven paper ran the announcement 3 weeks after the contract was signed. Mitchell Development Group selected for Millhaven Corridor Project. My name, my company, my project. In the town where I had been told I could barely afford my apartment. My mother called at 9:43 that morning. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. She said, "Zara, we saw the paper." She said, "We had no idea." She said, "Your father and I are so proud." I listened to the voicemail once, I saved it, and I went back to work. I called my mother back on a Thursday. Not because I needed to, because she was my mother, and because love is more durable than dismissal, even when the dismissal was the size of a Thanksgiving table. and I had been carrying it for 8 years. I called her because calling her was the right thing, and because I had learned across 8 years of building that doing the right thing and doing the satisfying thing are often different, and the right thing is what you do regardless. She answered immediately. She said, "Zara?" I said, "Hi, Mom." She said, "We saw the paper." I said, "I know." She said, "Why did you not tell us?" I said, "Mom, I have been building this for 8 years." She said, "I know, but we could have—" She stopped. I said, "You could have what?" She was quiet for a moment. She said, "Supported you." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Mom, I want to tell you something." She said, "Okay." I said, "I did not build this company to prove anything to this family." She said, "I know." I said, "I built it because it was what I was supposed to do, and I knew that at 24 at that dinner table, and the knowing did not require anyone's agreement to be true." She said, "Zara, we should have believed you." I said, "Yes, you should have." I said, "I want to tell you something else." She said, "Okay." I said, "Derek's laugh in 2016 was the most useful thing anyone at that table gave me that night." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I drove home from that dinner, and I sat at my kitchen table and I made a decision." I said, "The decision was that the next time this family heard about my business, it was going to be in a form they could not dismiss." I said, "The Millhaven contract was that form." She was quiet. Then she said, "Baby, I am sorry." She said it with the weight of 8 years in it, not performance, the genuine reckoning of a woman who has understood something she should have understood a long time ago. I said, "I know, Mom." I said, "I believe you." Raymond called 2 days later. He did not call to apologize exactly. He called in the way that men of his generation call when they know they should apologize and do not quite have the language for it. He said, "I heard about the Millhaven project." He said, "That is a serious piece of work." I said, "Thank you, Raymond." He said, "I did not know you had it in you." I said, "I know you did not." I said, "That is okay." I said, "I knew." He said, "Yeah." He said, "I guess you did." Derek texted. He said, "Congrats on the contract." That was the whole message. I replied, "Thank you." That was the whole reply. Some things do not require more than that. The Millhaven project breaks ground in the spring. I will be there for the ceremony. My team will be there. The planning board will be there. The local paper will be there. I have not decided yet whether to invite my family, not because I want to exclude them, because I want to make sure that if they come as people who have understood something, rather than people who are attending because the story has become one worth attending. There is a difference between showing up when something is finished and showing up for the work. I have been showing up for the work for 8 years. The standard I hold for the people around me is the same. If you have a table full of people who laughed at your beginning, this story is for you. Do not argue, do not defend, do not explain. Excuse yourself from the table. Drive home, sit at your kitchen table, open your laptop, go back to work. Do that for as long as it takes. The contract will arrive, they will read about it in the paper, and you will already be working on the next thing. That is my story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.